Week 11 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Joshua Dobbs of the Minnesota Vikings. So Joshua Dobbs, so far, 2 games with this Minnesota Viking team. He's taken the job by storm and playing great football. So the last few weeks, week 9 at Atlanta, 158 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 66 rush yards, a rushing touchdown, 2-point conversion, 2 fumble losses. In week 10 versus New Orleans, 268 pass yards. In that one, a touchdown, 8 rush attempts, and 44 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. So right now, he's running the football well as Joshua Dobbs. We know he has great weapons in this offense. T.J. Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, Alexander Madison, and Ty Chandler emerging out of the backfield. This week here, a good matchup at the Denver Broncos that give up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks in the season. So right now, Dobbs, well, he's a dual threat and a major upgrade going from Arizona's offense to Minnesota. He's a hot waiver wire pickup at the quarterback position and available right now in 50% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback's Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. So Jordan Love, he had a serviceable game in the tough Week 10 loss at the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the last 2 weeks, he's been all right, is Jordan Love. Week 9 versus the Rams, 228 pass yards, a touchdown, 7 rush yards. And then Week 10 in Pittsburgh, like I mentioned, 289 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs, and 11 rushing yards. So Week 11, good matchup on paper versus the Los Angeles Chargers that we know gives up a lot of yards to quarterbacks, even though this offensive line isn't been that great this season for this Green Bay Packer team. And obviously, even the running game, Aaron Jones and Dillon really haven't done much. But I think Jordan Love could go out there and make some plays. He's got good rapport with some of the younger wide receivers. I know him and Christian Watson really haven't been on the same page this season. But right now, Jordan Love, like I said, he's had some decent games this year, coming off a pretty good one with 20 fantasy points at a good Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So this week with a good matchup versus the Chargers that give up a lot of points to quarterbacks, I would give him an ad this week. The next quarterback, Jameis Winston of the New Orleans Saints. So Derek Carr with a possible concussion. And once again with the shoulder and back for Derek Carr. So it's been tough sledding for him. I know they got a bye week in week 11, but Jameis Winston definitely a quarterback to keep an eye on. So Winston finishing that game in Minnesota to 122 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 INTs. So we know Winston, that's what he does throughout his career. We know one season with Tampa Bay, 30 interceptions and 30 touchdowns he threw in 1 year. He's a gunslinger. He's a guy that's just going to throw the football down the field and hope for the best at times. But also he can make some big plays and drive down the field quick as well. And you got good weapons over there. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. Obviously now he's going to step in with Michael Thomas, possibly out a while after hurting the knee and leaving that ball game and off the field issue. So right now I know there's a possibility he might not be the starter as Jameis Winston after the bye week here. But like I said, quarterback's been a thin position, and he's definitely a quarterback to keep an eye on. Available in 99% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback's Baker Mayfield. Bay Buccaneers, so Baker Mayfield out there in 51% of fantasy leagues, just breaking the threshold because these videos are 50% or less available. So Baker Mayfield, he's been a solid quarterback this season, surprisingly, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But when you got good weapons, obviously, like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Kate Otten, even though I know he had an off game in Week 10, he's going to go out there and put up points. Week 8 at Buffalo, 237 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 19 rush yards, a 2-point conversion. Week 9 at Houston, 265 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. And then Week 10 versus Tennessee defense, we know is middle of the pack, 278 pass yards, 2 TDs, an INT, and 12 rush yards. So right now, Week 11, I know tough matchup here at the San Francisco 49ers, one of the better defenses in the league. And we just saw them destroy the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 10 and holding that offense down. But anyway, Baker Mayfield, I know he's pretty much a guy that scores 20 points a week. And once again, in a game where it's going to be tough running, I believe, for this Tampa Bay Buc team. He's a quarterback that I think could go out there and help owners. And the 5th and final quarterback I looked at off the wires, Russell Wilson of the Denver Broncos. So Russell Wilson, he's been the middle of the pack type of quarterback. I know his game's here tonight, Monday Night Football, Buffalo, but I'm just going off a streaming option regardless here for Week 11 versus Minnesota Vikings. I give up the 14th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Russ, I know the stats aren't all that great, but he's been a quarterback, believe it or not, top 12 in fantasy points at the position. So the last few games here for Wilson, Week 7 versus Green Bay, 194 pass yards, a touchdown, a rushing touchdown. And Week 8 in the upset victory versus the Chiefs, 114 pass yards, 3 TDs, 30 rush yards, and a fumble loss. So Russell Wilson, I know the passing yards haven't been great this season, but he's throwing touchdowns and he's got solid weapons around him in that offense. Cortland Sutton, he's having a good year. Jerry Jeudy having a good year as well the last few games. And Javonte Williams, Jaleel McGaw can have a backfield. Some decent weapons around him as well. Seeing he's still trying to make some plays with his legs. And right now, while he's out there in 54% of fantasy leagues, and he's a good streaming option, he's definitely a quarterback I look to get off the wire this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I look to add off the waiver wire for week 11 of the fantasy football season.